Hey, all right, back in the studio. We're doing this deep dive on Texas custody. And, you know, before we go too far, I want to talk about the issue of rights and duties and what that means joint managing conservatorship. So, sole managing conservatorship, possessory conservatorship. There's three basic levels, three tiers of how we define parental rights. Those are big jargony words, but they essentially mean the parental rights as we define them. And most parents in your majority of cases, when you got two really good people and they're just having a dispute over who should be the primary which household should be the primary residence, which household is the primary residence gets the child support, and that's usually where the discord or conflict arises. But there's also situations where there's a family violence scenario, where there's been a history of family violence or ongoing, and family violence is defined broadly, physical or emotional abuse, mental abuse, drug or alcohol abuse, physical violence, sexual assault, physical assault, things of that nature. Broad definitions in Texas. We're going to be dealing mostly with a situation where you've just got you got none of that, and it's just a joint managing conservator scenario where you got two equally good people, and there's nuanced differences between them, their parenting styles, and their abilities. But the likelihood is they're going to be determined to be joint managing conservators. No history of violence, no bad facts. And so what is custody and how is it determined when you have this essentially equal standing? Well, the court is more likely than not going to find that the parents are joint managing conservators, which means they have all the same rights they had as parents prior to the court intervention. This is just a determination of where that needle gets moved. And, rarely is this determination a blowout, completely one-sided or the other, in the absence of family violence facts, right? Rarely is it completely a blowout. They're usually really, really close decisions. Think about the closest sporting event you've ever seen, whether it was a race, whether it was a basketball or football game, 131 to 133 in double overtime during March Madness, whatever, it doesn't matter. The findings are very nuanced because the burden of proof is that civil burden of proof I've talked about in other video series, but it's the greater weight of admitted believable evidence, and that's very difficult to prove on these temporary basis, right? So when a case is open and there's a disagreement about how the parents are going to co-parent, the court has a temporary orders hearing. It's essentially a short trial at the beginning of the case to determine those things, like the parent with the right to designate the primary residence and receive child support, and the other parent who gets the right to possession and access to the child, visitation, and the obligation to pay child support. So those factors that go in there were set out by our Supreme Court in 1976. I'm going to touch on those briefly so you have some idea of what those are. This is not an exhaustive list. The court can consider other things, but certainly things that a court does consider is what does the child desire? And I'll tell you that as the children get older, that becomes more important. Also, the emotional, physical needs of the child now and in the future, the physical danger to the child, both in the past, right now, and in the future, the parenting abilities of those two parents seeking custody, programs and resources available to the parents seeking, superior right of custody, plans of the parents with regard to the child, like what my future plans are, where I'm going to live, what my resources will be, what schools will change, remain the same, etc. Stability of both households, acts and sometimes wrongful acts of the parents that indicate that there's something not completely fit. There's not a proper relationship that can be provided for the child, and then any excuses for those acts or sometimes those wrongful acts that might mitigate that previous factor that we were talking about, that would mitigate any kind of allegation or showing that one parent over the other might not have a proper relationship with the child or be able to provide the proper opportunities, a household for the child. Again, the court can consider many factors, but these are the broad strokes ones that come into determination in that best interest of the child. So it is a big set of considerations, and the judges have to do this in a very compressed time period, because in a temporary orders hearing, you're talking that one side gets 20 to maybe 30 minutes, and the other side might get 20 to maybe 30 minutes. So all in, you're looking at a hearing that might last no more than an hour. And even if you break it up and take little chunks of it, as we're doing more and more with modern remote Zoom hearings and stuff, you're still looking at a very compressed timeline to make hard decisions about what's going to happen for the duration of the case. And the first shot on the determination of temporary orders and child primary residence, obligation to pay child support, that's a judge call. The judge by the legislature in Texas has to make that call if somebody wants temporary orders at the beginning of the case. And it's a difficult ruling to flip on final trial. We'll get more into that later, but it's a judge decision the first time out. So the stakes are high, and it literally it can be a job interview of your life. But the purpose of this is not to intimidate and create anxiety. There's already enough of that in the minds of people who, in my experience, there's already enough of that. So the purpose of this is to let people know what broad, vague, weird definition of custody means, and what are the factors behind it that result in the rulings the courts are required to make, and this compressed timeline, 40 minutes per side, total. So anyway, please like, subscribe, and share. Hope you guys love the new format. More to come on custody in Texas next.